So we are recording. So welcome everyone to our March meeting. I'm Erin Frigo. I'm the president of the Panhandle Archaeological Society. And tonight our speaker is Scott Hammerstedt talking to us about is it Spiro?
Yeah.
Okay. Spiro Mounds, a history and current research. This presentation will be recorded and live streamed straight to our YouTube channel. So please make yourself as anonymous as you'd like. We do ask that you turn off your speakers just because that does help to minimize interference. If you don't know how to do that, I can do that for you, so no worries. Also, just because we've had this problem recently, if you know that you're going to be like walking around and moving around a lot, like on camera, we do ask that you turn off your camera as well, because that can be very distracting. So other than that, I will give the floor to you, Scott. It is all yours.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so yeah, today I'm going to talk to you about Spiro Mounds. I'm told by Scott that not a lot of people know a whole lot about it. So what we're going to do is start off by talking about sort of the history of the site, including the work that was done, work and looting that was done in the 1930s. Talk about our current interpretation of what we think is going on at this mound that you see here called the Craig Mound, and talk a little bit about the work that my colleagues and I here at OU and University of Arkansas have been doing for the past, I guess, 12 years. I don't know how that happened, but there we go. So Spiro is located in eastern Oklahoma. It's along the Arkansas River, very close to what's currently Fort Smith, Arkansas. You can see it sort of drawn there. It's related to the Mississippian culture, although it's not really Mississippian, which is a group of related cultures that lived across the Southeast and Midwest between about AD 1000 and 1500, sort of give or take. And some of the major sites are on here. We have Cahokia here, Moundville in Alabama, Etowah in Georgia. These are some of the sort of major sites. And these are split up into different groups based upon slightly different traits from other people. Just sort of zooming in and showing you where the location of Spiro is on the Arkansas River. You can sort of see it circled in red there. Spiro has the distinction of being the only archaeological site in Oklahoma that's open to the public. It just actually reopened yesterday. The director retired, and it took him a few months to get things rolling. So it's open to the public again, so people can go there if they so desire. There's three basic types of mounds at Spiro, and I should have an overall site map that I'll throw up in a second. But the first one is sort of the conjoined burial mound right here. You can see there's the four little lobes. This is the mound that I'm going to be talking about the most today. It's called Craig Mound, and for scale, that's me right there flying a drone, and I'm 6'2", so it's not a very small mound. We also have platform mounts here. You can sort of see it coming up on the side. These things are really hard to take photographs of, but this is a photograph from the 1930s coming across around here. And these were built in several layers, often have houses on the top of them. Sometimes they're argued to be residents of chiefs. Sometimes they're argued to be residents of priests. It depends on where you are in the Mississippian world, how these things are interpreted. And then we also have house mounds, which are basically locations where houses were constructed. A house was built, it was destroyed and dismantled, another house was built on top of it, and the cycle repeats itself until you get a mound that's, between 20 and 50 centimeters tall. Those are the ones that show up here. And it's kind of hard to see in this slide, but there is a small little mound right there that had some burials in it at the Spiro site called the Ward Mounds. So yeah, here's the map of the site. I thought I had this here. The site can be split up into a couple different areas, and we see the large Craig Mound here, which is the main mortuary feature that the site is really known for. You have the two smaller Ward Mounds that are here that had some burials in them, and probably the earliest activity at the site dating to around the earliest parts of it date to around 1000 AD. We have the Brown Mound here, which is a large platform mound, the one I showed you in the last slide. Another platform mound called Koppel, and a ring of house mounds surrounding what's probably a plaza in the middle. And I'm going to talk a little bit later on about sort of what's happening in this what looks to be an empty bit. But basically what we believed is that the area down around the Craig Mound is sort of the locus of ritual activity, mortuary activity, and the area up here was more of a habitation area. And what you see here, this is a creek that runs through the middle of the site. This will be important a little bit later on. It used to run down a path like this, but sometime in the 1940s or 50s, they rechanneled it through here, which unfortunately took out the WPA's datum point, which is kind of a bummer. But it was kind of funny. I was given a version of this talk a number of years ago in Northeast Oklahoma. And after I was done, a man probably in his mid to late 80s came up to me, introduced himself as Mr. Ward, and told me that he and his father and grandfather were the ones who had actually kind of trenched that. So that was kind of cool. This is what the mound looks like today from the ground surface. I showed you the shot before from a drone. This is from a few years ago when we were getting ready to do some work out there. You can see one of our stakes there at the moment. This part of the mound is completely reconstructed. It was completely leveled by the WPA when they excavated here in the 1930s. That was a stipulation of the lease they signed with the landowners so they could make it easier to farm. But we have this photograph taken by Joseph Thoburn, who was at OU at the time and later went on to found the Oklahoma Historical Society. But he took this photograph of Craig Mound before it had been dug into at all. And this photograph was used to reconstruct the mound. In 1970, Don Wyckoff from OU did some excavations to locate the former footprint of where the Craig Mound was, and then we're able to rebuild it as part of this. And it's kind of funny to see this little horse barn here, because when the WPA guys talked to some of the local landowners back in the 30s, they said that it was almost impossible to keep livestock and horses out there because there are all sorts of things like crazy little blue lights that came out and scared all the animals. So it's kind of cool to sort of see that. So after Thoburn was there, so Thoburn in this slide, he was not able to dig into Craig Mound, but he did excavate into the Ward Mounds and took a lot of valuable photographs of other parts of the site. I've got a couple of them in here, but he took photographs of the Koppel Mound and a number of other features to show them in a really nice undisturbed state, which we don't really see today. The main early work at Spiro was called the group called the Pocola Mining Company, who were a bunch of local ne'er-do-wells who were trying to make a quick buck during the Depression. They were able to obtain a lease to dig into Craig Mound, and they were working on it for a while. They were finding some stuff. Eventually, some of the stuff they were finding was pretty spectacular. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a little bit. But eventually what they were doing, the word of what they were doing got back to a man named Forrest Clements, who was the chair of the anthropology department at OU at the time. And he managed to get a law passed saying that you weren't allowed to excavate into any mounds unless you had a permit signed by the chair of anthropology at OU, who of course was Forrest Clements. And he wasn't about to renew their lease. Let me make sure. Yeah. So what happened here was that they stopped for a while, and then Clements took a break for the summer and went to California to teach. And while he was gone, they got wind that he was gone. They decided they were going to go at one last shot, and they dug a tunnel straight in. Before this, they were digging big open pits like the one you see here. This is in Craig Mound. But they decided to dig a tunnel into the largest lobe of Craig Mound and hit what turned out to be probably the largest deposit of ritual material ever found in North America, and probably ever will be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that and the location of it and its significance later on. So they were able to get in there, but then when their lease expired, they were then forced to leave. And this just sort of shows you the extent of what they did. This is the large cone of Craig right here, and you can see how they really chunked into it. Their tunnel is over here. You can't really see it in this photograph, but it was on the north side of the mound. And there's the tunnel. You can see a nice shot of it in profile, and then again coming in. It went in about 20 feet. And I thought for a long time that this photograph was from outside of what's called the hollow chamber inside the Craig Mound, but it turns out this is actually taken from the inside with the tunnel going out that direction. This is what was left of the two of the three smaller cones at the time. You can see it's just sort of cratered and pockmarked. They obviously weren't particularly careful diggers. Again, they were just looking for cool stuff to find, and that's really all they particularly cared about. We'll talk a little bit more about the central chamber in just a few minutes, but this is some of the stuff that was found inside this chamber. We have the famous resting warrior pipe. This guy right here, who's sometimes believed to be a representation of the mythical hero Redhorn, also called he who wears human heads as earrings. And you can't really see it in this photograph, but it does have two human heads on either side where his ears would be. We have a series of these ceremonial maces that were found inside the hollow chamber, and here's some of the decorated shell cups that Spiro is very well known for. And these are both over a foot long. A number of different ear spools. These are found not just at Spiro, but a number of other places. I'm going to talk about pretty much only about Spiro for this talk, but I should point out that the ritual activity and ritual practices that we're describing here, we know occurred throughout much of the Arkansas River drainage, and especially at least four four contemporaneous sites that also had conjoined burial mounds that looked much like Craig. And these ranged anywhere from about 1.5 inches to about 3 or 4 inches, and they're made some of them are made from stone, some of them are wood. The wood's preserved by copper. There was sort of a leaf on the outside of it, and there's a couple that are shell and bone as well. One of the most spectacular discoveries, because this hollow chamber was sealed for so many years until the looters broke in. When they actually broke into the tunnel or into the chamber, they described having a rush of air come out because it was so sealed. But because it was so sealed, we have some tremendous preservation of textiles. This is the Spiro lace. It's ridiculously thin, ridiculously well made. We have it at Sam Noble, but here at OU, but it's not on display because it's so fragile. But we also have woven baskets. We have a ton of other types of textiles. This particular one on the bottom is actually made of rabbit fur, and it's a black and white photo, so you can't really see it, but it has black and yellow and red dyes all in it. We'll talk about more about these, but the only reason these were really preserved is because of the tomb being sealed. One of the last things that they did before the looters did before they left was that they were hoping they could sort of strike it rich again. So they took a mule team and dug a tunnel right through the middle of the Brown Mound, which you can see here. But Brown Mound didn't have the types of deposits that Craig did, so they didn't have as much luck. But you can see it's quite the trench, and you can still see remnants of it today when you visit the site. The next round was sort of done by the WPA. Now, this was WPA, of course, was part of Roosevelt's New Deal during the Depression, which was aimed at putting people back to work, and so people didn't starve to death. And archaeology was a very popular discipline to fund. Partly because it didn't interfere or compete with private enterprise. Also, you could put large numbers of people to work without a lot of effort, a lot of supervision. And it's not just Oklahoma where this happened. WPA archaeology happened in all sorts of places across the South and Midwest. I've worked with WPA collections in Alabama, Tennessee, and Kentucky, as well as in Oklahoma. This was overseen by Forrest Clements, who was the man who got the law passed. And he hired, these are the 4 main supervisors who were in charge of the excavations, not just at Spiro, but at least 100 sites across Oklahoma. And they're fairly well known in archaeological circles. David Barris here on the left is probably the one who went on to have the most storied career. He ended up retiring as a professor at the University of Wisconsin in the 80s. Ken Orr, there, second from left, did a lot of stuff in archaeology, but wound up running a contract archaeology firm in Virginia towards the end of his career. Phil Nukamit is second from the right. He actually wound up marrying a Caddo woman. His daughter is the one who gave us this photograph. He worked in archaeology for quite some time, dabbled in it for many, many years, worked on revitalizing Caddo languages, and is super, super important, took lots of photographs and some fantastic notes. So we owe a lot to him. And Lynn Howard worked in archaeology for quite a while after he was done, but wound up teaching, it was either high school or middle school in Arizona after that. He had enough fun digging holes and decided he'd go deal with 12-year-old monsters, I guess. The WPA, again, their methods were much cruder than what we look at today, but they at least were fairly rigorous. They took careful notes, dug things in levels. They dug for a while, they dug in sort of sheer giant profiles like this one, and you can see some of the little tunnels in there. This is a cedar pole that made up the part of the wall of the hollow chamber. We'll talk about that in a second. After a period of time, there was a site now it's called Schedule that's about 2 miles west of Spiro. They were digging one of these giant profiles, but they didn't realize that the mound was tunneled with looter pits, and the profile collapsed and killed a couple of workers. And then after that, they changed to not having these giant profiles, but having more sort of stepped ones. So it was a little bit safer for them. Here's another example, just showing you the upright cedar pole here. You have some shell cup fragments on the ground, and here's the tunnel and a guy for scale. If you look at some of Phil Newcomb's notes, he talks about going out to the site, and basically it looked like it snowed outside the tunnel because of all the crushed fragments of shell that the looters didn't care about and just left stranded, just sitting around there. They talk about taking some of these cedar poles and using them for fires, all sorts of things like that. So just sort of things that makes your skin crawl when you really think about it. I mentioned earlier that part of their lease stipulated they needed to leave the site completely flat when they left. They hired a local man who actually lived on what's part of the Spiro site proper, part of the park itself right now. Name was George Evans. This is him and his mule team here. And his job was to go around behind as the diggers threw their backfill over their shoulders. His job was to go around with the mule team and flatten it all out. And it sounds like Evans was a bit of a unique person, and they routinely talk in the notes about how he disappears for a week at a time on a bender and then comes back talking about, wanting to get paid and all sorts of fun stuff like that. But that's a whole nother talk for another time. So the WPA excavated all of Craig Mound, all of the Ward mounds, and tested every single other mound at the site to a certain degree. Sometimes it was just one small little pit. Sometimes it was a little bit more extensive. They found a number of houses. They were very good at walking across the surface and noticing clusters of artifacts on the surface, identifying the locations of houses and excavating those. And here's a couple of examples. You can see the wall of scooped out posts on the outside. Spiro houses from a certain time period are very well known for having these 4 central support posts. You can see over here with a little less sort of clutter. But we do have an artist reconstruction down here that shows what one of these things most likely looked like, based upon the archaeological reconstruction as well as ethnographic accounts. So they found, I believe they found about 18 different houses in various parts of the site. After that, nobody really worked there for an extensive period of time. Jim Brown from the University or Northwestern University, who's like the godfather of Spiro, has done a ton of work there. We'll talk about him a little bit later. Did a little bit of work there in the 60s. Don Wyckoff, who's shown here in the white shirt, did some work, like I said, in 1970 to figure out where the Craig Mound was. And a number of folks from the Oklahoma Archaeological Survey, directed by Don from back in Norman, but directed in the field by Dan Rogers, who I think I don't have a picture of in here. But they focused their work on house mounds and part of the plaza from the 79 to 82. And after that, it sort of sat fallow until our current project. So there's sort of the history of work done at the site. What I want to talk about right now is the most recent interpretations of what's going on at the Craig Mound. And I should point out that only a fraction of this has been published so far. And a lot of this has been driven by work that Jim Brown has done, George Sabo at the University of Arkansas as well, and a number of other folks. This is not, I believe in the interpretation, but I didn't have any part in sort of bringing it up. The Spiro Mound, the Craig Mound here called the Spiro Mound, is basically the 2 most important features in it are what's called the Great Mortuary, which is right here in red, and the central hollow chamber, also called the Spirit Lodge, that was constructed above it in this largest cone of the Craig Mound. And what we see is when this is built, again, we're looking at Craig Mound here at its final stage. It didn't always look like this. It was built in a couple different stages over time. And right now I just have my drone photo oriented to sort of match what we're seeing in this map. But what we have here is this area is sort of in tan, yellow, whatever that color is, was a low platform mound that was constructed. And then at a certain point is when we see the construction of the Great Mortuary. The Great Mortuary was constructed somewhere around AD 1200 and was in use until somewhere around 1400. And what we see here is that that mortuary was a basin dug into this platform mound that was then used repeatedly over and over the course of about 200 years. And what's happening here is that so here's the Spirit Lodge over top of it. That's constructed a little bit later. And what we're going to talk about first is the Great Mortuary. And what we have here is this is an area that was used again for about 200 years. And what we see is periodically the mortuary is cleaned out. Individuals are sort of, let me back up here, buried on the reburied from the Great Mortuary into the flanks of this platform mound, and then other individuals are put inside the Great Mortuary. And what's interesting about it is, for a long period of time, archaeologists thought that having these litter burials and important looking people and cool artifacts in the Great Mortuary was an indication of the presence of a chief. But what we know now is that what happens is this is an ossuary. So it's people who are excavated from elsewhere, brought in and placed in the Great Mortuary, but they're not laid out as individual people. The bones are all intermingled, twisted together. Artifacts such as copper plates and pots and things like that are ritually killed, or bent in half and thrown in there with these. So what we think now is it's probably a statement of group identity as opposed to venerating one particular person. We have the layer 2. This is layer 1, where we have a layer of some cane mats down at the bottom and then bones put on top of it. We have layer 2 later, where there's a large post built, sort of blocking the entranceway of this mound. We have this is the best image that exists, unfortunately, for the Craig Mound, or for the Great Mortuary. It's not a great one, but this is sort of what we've got. You've got these cedar poles laid out with more individuals sort of placed on top of them in a couple of different rows. But it's also disarticulated and partly disarticulated people with burial goods thrown inside of them. And the last area is sort of what we call the Spirit Lodge. And that is this hollow chamber that is built atop of the Great Mortuary. The Great Mortuary itself is sealed off and capped, and this hollow chamber made of cedar poles with sod blocks around the outside is constructed on top of it. And what it basically is showing us is it's a cosmogram of what people thought the world was like. You have this is called the resting warrior pipe. You can see I talked about him a couple minutes ago. In this one, you can actually see the earrings shaped like heads here. He's placed in the wall facing out as sort of a guardian. You have Earth Mother, who's a very, very special symbol of fertility and agriculture, placed in the middle. Another bunch of mythic heroes around the outside. A number of these are called pataka, but they're basically double lidded woven baskets that have sacred artifacts inside them, coppers and things like that. What we think these might be are sacred bundles being brought in as part of this event. And on this side, I think this is better. Yeah, here we go. This is an artist rendition done by the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, but you can see a bunch of those maces that I showed in an earlier photograph. Here's the resting warrior pipe facing outwards. Here's First Man, one of the important figurines. Here you've got these with all these double lidded baskets. And over here you have a bunch of engraved shell cups. And I'm not going to talk about these much, but these shell cups have a very distinctive style that probably were created specifically for this. And what they depict, if you put them in you put them in a row based upon the movements and stuff in the iconography, and what you see is what's probably a sacred figure, like a god of some sort, or for lack of a better word, handing off a forked pole to someone who's probably a shaman. And you can see speech scrolls and stuff for them, probably singing and doing things like that. There is one skull found in this. This is completely devoid of human remains except for this one skull. And for a while, people thought that maybe that was going to be a chief of some sort, or perhaps the first religious leader. And if you look at more modern, well, not modern, but 1700 accounts of Caddo society, there's an individual called the Genasi, who is the religious leader. And for a while, we thought that maybe this skull represented the first Genasi. But if you look at it very closely, the skull itself, so I'm told, I haven't seen it personally, but I'm told that it has a shine to the top of the skull that's distinctive with it being handled quite often. So what we think right now is it's probably just another offering of not an individual person, but part of this group identity as part of this ceremonial display inside the main cone of Craig Mound. And so eventually, when this is finally finished up, the hollow chamber, again, the hollow chamber event happens around 1400, give or take 20, 30 years, 50 years, something like that. You know, it's carbon dating, so you got to be a little bit weird with it. But it's arranged, it's sealed over, and there's other burials placed above it. That's what these little black squiggles sort of are. But they know exactly where this great mortar or this spirit lodge actually is. So they dig down in here, but they're not quite getting into it. And they maintain a vertical orientation similar with what's going on in the hollow chamber itself. And some people have argued that that's an axis mundi length of what's called the above world. The cosmology for these folks, the Caddoan speaking people, and lots of other Southeastern groups, is you have the beneath world, this world where we live, and the above world. And there's different creatures that inhabit each one, and some of them are able to go back and forth. But it's just there's an axis mundi through the middle that joins all of those things together. And so we think part of this is a representation of that. And the big question is, why was it created? Why was there such a big break from that centuries worth of commingled burials and things like that happening? But one of the things that we are currently thinking is that between about 1350 and 1400, this part of the world was subject to a really, really intense drought. And one argument that we've been making is that the Spirit Lodge is an attempt to sort of reboot the cosmos and bring the rains back, sort of break from everything they've done before, because clearly whatever they were doing wasn't working. And this is an attempt to sort of get everything started again and back the way it came. Well, it didn't work. Spiro itself is largely abandoned sometime between 14 and 1450. But it's an important point to note that the area was not abandoned. And that's something people didn't realize for a while. There's a separate culture after this called the Fort Coffee culture. And those folks are, they're still using Spiro related ceramics, but they've shifted into formal cemeteries, and they're doing much more of a plains way of life, where bison scapula hoes are coming in and they dig these bell-shaped pits that weren't done before then. So we think there's just much more of a plains adaptation in this part of the world at this point, and that's what's sort of happening. So Craig Mound, again, is, because of what's found in that hollow chamber, is the largest collection of ritual artifacts found in one place, basically in North America. And if those guys from the Pocono Mining Company would have tunneled into any other mound in the country, they wouldn't have hit what they hit. But fortunately, over the past 80 years or so, enough people have worked on these collections that they do sort of make a little bit of sense. Again, the hollow chamber may have been a response to this severe drought. But the important point to make here, and while I'm jumping off into our next segment of the talk, is that it tells us a lot about ritual life was like, but tells us almost nothing about what everyday people were doing. And that's where we want it. That's what our project comes in. It's the Spiro Landscape Archaeological Project. We have a Facebook page if anybody wants to follow it. It's pretty dormant unless we're in the field. But what we wanted to do was figure out what's going on off the mounds using a combination of geophysical techniques and excavations. And so what I'm going to talk about here in the time I have left, looks like I got to get a move on, is to talk about the geophysical survey we've done and some of the ground truthing we've been doing. So we've used a number of different techniques out there. Magnetometry, GPR, and electrical resistance are the ones we've done the most, along with precision mapping. We do have a centimeter level accuracy map of the site. I'm pretty much just going to talk about gradiometry today, which detects subtle magnetic variations in soil and lets us pick out pits and post molds and building floors and hearths and things from the surrounding less magnetic soil. So this is this is an old aerial photograph of the site. The Craig Mound is right here, and we've surveyed everything outlined in red, which is basically the entire area inside the park that doesn't have trees on it and a large field outside the park. And here is our gradiometry results, sort of with some of the mounds drawn on top of them. Let's see, there's a whole sorts of stuff going on here, but there's lots of, the darker areas are increased magnetism. What we have over here, this giant mess of noise over here, is an old meander channel, the Arkansas River, that deposited a much more magnetic soil there, which screws up our data. But the important points that I will make for here are looking at all of these small little dots there. And here we'll sort of zoom in on it and show them there, both inside and outside the park boundaries. And they're arranged more or less in rough rows, the same orientation as the Craig Mound, which we found pretty interesting. So in 2013 and 2014, we excavated 4 of these buildings, and they're sort of outlined here. What we were particularly confused by was that they're very faint. So normally with the gradiometer work, if you're finding a cultural feature of this type, it'll range from somewhere between 6 and about 12 nanoteslas. And the important point here is not exactly what a nanotesla is, but the fact that these anomalies that I've got highlighted here were only about 0.8. So they're very, very faint. And so we were very kind of confused by what that might be. They too turn out to be houses. They're, again, very faint. I showed you the pictures earlier where you have those typical spiral houses with nice straight walls, nice round, nice square roof wall patterns and things like that. Well, that's not what we have going on here. They're not really square. They're not really circles. We call them squircles, for lack of a better word. They have a couple central posts, but they're not really centered. The posts are varying in size. The typical spiral houses have posts of about the same size in the wall. Here we don't really have that. They do match up nicely with the gradiometer results in this case and the electrical resistance results, so we know they're legit. They don't have much in them. Again, here's a typical spiral house for comparison, and the patterns for the ones that we actually excavated. They're very ephemeral. They're very irregular in shape. They're kind of sloppy, kind of mismatched. They don't really have internal hearths and features, which is something that we find very, very curious. And so right now, our working hypothesis is that these are temporary buildings representing a pilgrimage to the site with something to do with Craig Mound. We really want it to be associated with the Spirit Lodge, but unfortunately, we have absolutely nothing datable from these. We did have 2 post molds that we dated from 2 different houses, from house, let's see, it was house 22 and house 21. But those turned out to be, well, we'll tell the whole story. Why not? We sent it off for dating, and I was in Idaho on a rafting trip and got off the river and saw my phone and saw an email from Beta Analytic, and I got all excited about it. And I opened it up, and both of them are from the same fence that was built sometime around 1910. So that's the only thing we've got that's datable so far, and it doesn't really help us much. So we're going to have to go back and excavate at least 1 or 2 more of these and hopefully get something datable. We're also hoping to get into the geophysical data a little bit more and see if we can find evidence of hearths or food processing areas, but it's a lot of data to try to go through. It's something like 840 20 by 20 meter grids, which takes a little bit of time to get through it all. So that was our 2014 field school, 2013 test project, and 2014 field school. We wanted to focus for our next project. This is this past summer. This is hot off the presses for y'all. We wanted to focus on some areas that were a little less ephemeral. And so first thing we want to look at, this area here is right where you can see these topographic lines. It's right where it goes from the lower terrace that Craig Mound is up about 20 feet to the upper terrace where Brown Mound is. And we have this series of anomalies in a line across here. And we wanted to know if they were houses, if they were just an old road, or if they were maybe marker posts, like some of these giant cedar posts that you find at places like Cahokia that symbolically split up space. So we targeted 2 of these. You can see them right here outlined in blue. They're probably about 12 feet across, both of them. And the other area we want to look at, and here it is zoomed in, is this beautiful square looking anomaly up on the upper terrace that really looked to us like it was probably going to be a house. or a building of some sort. And there they are, just on the overall map of the site again. So you can see as it gets darker green, the elevation goes up. So you can see how they're right on the edge. And then some of these houses, these are the 4 ephemeral buildings we dug before. And these are a couple WPA ones that are on this map for reasons that escape me at the moment, but that's okay. So block 1 is what we're talking about, and house 24 are the 2 most important things that we're going to be getting into for the next couple minutes. Block 1, we didn't finish for reasons I'll talk about in just a minute. We do have a nice roundish anomaly. You can sort of see the dark soil here. This is inside of the feature. This is outside. Another example of it right in here. We did have some charred material that we see here that we were very excited and thought might be a roof timber, but then when we actually got it out of the ground, we realized it was just a little scatter of charcoal that we're going to hopefully send off to get a date off of, but we haven't had a chance to do that quite yet. We have some interpretations of it, even though we're not actually done. You can see it sort of matches pretty nicely with the gradiometer results, and we have a little bit of it in the other block. There are some analogies to other sites that were excavated in the Arkansas Valley at Harlan, and another, which is in Oklahoma, another site called Goforth-Sandin that's over in Huntsville, that are over in Arkansas, but still part of this Spiro and Obrit, that it might be a pit house. With one wall of it showing up on our excavation plan here, another one over here, and then with the basin potentially coming through down underneath it. As you can see from the profiles, though, we haven't gotten down deep enough to really confirm that. And I will also admit that among the 3 of us who are running this part of the project, we don't all agree on this interpretation, but we'll figure it out when we actually get down to it and get it all exposed. This is why we didn't finish. The tarps held nicely here, but during this project, we lost all or parts of 11 out of 24 days to rain, including our second to last week where we got 15 inches in 1 week and 9 in 1 morning. So that'll throw a wrench into the works of pretty much any archaeological project. But I will point out that our tarps held, which is a good thing. The problem is the water came up from underneath too. The other area is house 24 up in here. We also called the structure block. We didn't give it a number until the very end because we weren't sure what it was going to turn out to be. It wound up being a fairly large scale excavation, not as deep as the block 1 excavation. We only had to go down about 30 centimeters to expose our building here. These are 2x2, so we've got about an 8-meter expanse exposed this way and about 6 this way with a couple little extensions. And what we have here is it's clearly a house basin. You can see one of the walls coming through here and a corner through here. Of course, heading into the wall, we have a nice post mold up in this corner, which we have not excavated yet. And here with our students doing the floor trowel, you can see the edge of the basin sort of coming through right like that. And we do think it's a building. One thing it's not super easy to see in this photograph, but this area right here looks to be the remnants of a prepared clay floor that was probably plowed away over on this side of the building. This side of the building is a little bit higher than this one, but you can see the walls coming through here and through here, and then we kind of lose it right in here. We suspect that part of the basin might have been plowed away. Excuse me. And just from another angle, you can see the wall coming through here. We do think we probably have an extended entranceway, as you can see it, one part of it in the geophysics right there, but we didn't get a chance to excavate out into that area. That's going to be one of the things that we need to do fairly on. And this is part of one side of what we think is our prepared clay floor. And then here's the wall of the house overlaying on top of the geophysics. And these photographs here were taken on the very last day, so we were not able to get into it to get into any details. And here we go. This is the students actually made a t-shirt of disgruntled Scott here, which is kind of amusing, but you can see how the water came up from underneath, and we've got tarps basically floating right here. This is a shot that Dennis Peterson, who's the recently retired site manager at Spiro, took. This is the parking lot at Spiro, and he took it on his way out as he was actually evacuating the site, which is kind of too bad, but it's kind of epic at the same time. We don't have anything datable yet, although we do have some carbon dates that we've taken. The artifacts we found both in block 1 and in structure 24 suggest the Harlan phase, which is outlined right here between about 1050 or so and about 1250, which is a time when things are really hopping at Spiro and also throughout most of the Arkansas Valley. You have connections with places like Cahokia near St. Louis. You have objects coming in from there. We have these very distinctive potsherds. Basically, there's a couple of key types. One of them is called, well, up until recently, it's been called Spiro engraved. It's now being changed to Iwi engraved, which is a Caddo word for eagle, since that motif is associated with the above world. And this is something that the Caddos themselves are really interested in doing, is taking away sort of the names that aren't applicable to them and redoing it. But we have some of these ceramics with the very distinctive engravings and some of these punctates seen right here. There's another type which has these annular rings that come around the rim. This piece was completely intact in the ground until a student stabbed it with a trowel, and that's what you see. But that is what it is. That's how archaeology works. We break stuff. And our points are all the typical Harlan phase too. And this is, like I said, contemporaneous with a lot of stuff going on at Spiro. It's when the Great Mortuary is founded. There's another area at the site that I didn't talk about much, but it's called House Mound 5. And it's an area that was interpreted to be, it has three houses built on top of each other sequentially, all with extended entranceways. That's argued to be the residence of a ritual specialist. So we'll have to get back to it. Our future plans are to finish up these areas. This is what they look like right now, backfilled. I was out at the site on Monday and they're still holding up pretty well. We left sandbags and stuff in the bottom so we can pretty easily get them dug out. We're hoping to get back out with the field school in maybe 2024, but that's something that we have to negotiate with the other archaeology faculty because that rotates through all of us and it's not necessarily our turn in line, but we're hoping they'll take pity on us because of the rain. So the idea is to go back and finish these two areas from this year. There's a possible house mound right here outlined in, I guess that's orange, and another temporary building here in outlined in green. This is part of the permit, the current ARPA permit we have. I didn't mention the site itself is owned by the Corps of Engineers and leased by the Historical Society. So we have an agreement with those two groups as well as the Caddo and the Wichita to do this work. And I will take a second here to throw in a shameless plug for the book that Amanda Rainier and I have just finished. It comes out on May 1st on Spiro and WPA archaeology in Oklahoma. It's aimed at a popular audience. It's mostly photographs with long captions, which you may have seen books in this series before. And so let me just conclude by thanking all sorts of folks, especially the Corps, the Historical Society, the tribes, and the survey and the College of Art and Sciences for providing support. This is our field school from this summer with Patrick Livingood and Amanda Rainier right here, who are my co-PIs, and then a bunch of our students. This is probably I've taught a lot of field schools over the years, and this is probably the best one we've had sort of so far. So with that, I will go ahead and wrap things up and go ahead and take some questions. Looks like we might already have one. Yeah, so the question is, what's my involvement with current day Caddo and fieldwork and analysis? So the Caddo are basically, they're very interested in our work. They've given us permission to do everything. We consult with them on pretty much everything we do, not just at Spiro. They haven't had a ton of interest in coming to visit, but they're very interested in being informed in what we do. So we go down to Binger and give presentations occasionally to keep them up to speed. And it's a very similar situation with the Wichita.
Does anyone have any other questions for Scott?
Scott, did you see the Spirit World exhibit at the Dallas Museum of Art?
Yeah, I was a consultant on that.
It was terrific. Thank
It
you.
was, it was, it was a lot of work. It took about almost 10 years to put it together.
Wow.
For a variety of reasons. But it was really nice to see it come to fruition. It was actually in Oklahoma City as well, and also in Birmingham, Alabama. And I just actually talked to Eric Singleton, who is the main curator of it, yesterday, because the Spiro Museum is in the process of being completely redone. If you go there now, everything in there is a classic example of what we thought about Spiro in 1985. But Eric is actually going to give us almost everything that we want to use from the Spiro exhibit, the signage and various things, obviously not the artifacts, but a lot of the text and a lot of the illustrations and things to be able to use in the Spiro exhibit, so that material can still be seen by people, which is fantastic.
It was very well done, and it had a wonderful illustration of the of their concept of the underworld and the middle world and the
Yes.
world.
Yeah, that's very well done. They also had a really nice example of what we think these temporary buildings looked like. We worked closely with Chase Earls on that. Chase is a contemporary Caddo potter who does fantastic work. You should all check his stuff out. I can only afford to buy pots that are about that big, but it's still, but he did a really nice job with that. And I completely geeked out because I had never seen the Earth Mother pipe before, let alone in the same case as the Resting Warrior. So I kept circling back to that and like pressing my face to the glass, like a complete and utter dork, but I guess I am. It comes with having a PhD.
Hey, Scott, it's Jesse.
Hey.
Oh, sorry.
Hey, so you were talking about for coffee Spiro transition there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So can you walk me through bison at Spiro again?
Basically, we just have up until the Fort Coffee phase, we don't have any examples of bison coming up in any archaeological context. But during Fort Coffee, we start to see the bison scapula hose show up along with those bell-shaped pits. And that's sort of been the argument that people have made. This is mostly Chuck Rohrbaugh's interpretation of the adaptation to the plains, sort of the plains lifestyle. And it happens at a couple other sites like Hughes, which is currently under the Muskogee Country Club. So you see it there as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Otherwise, there's no like big bison. Like they don't. It's not west. Okay.
As far as I know, we have the odd skull that washes up in the river. Lee would be a better person to ask about than me. But as far as I know, that's the only case. We don't really see large deposits of bison. It's mostly just the tools.
Right.
And I see a question here from Scott basically saying, how important is the geophysics to the work and how do we test anomalies? So the geophysics to me is almost essential in terms of what I'm doing these days, which is kind of funny because I've never taken a physics class. I've never taken a geophysics class. I got to OU and we had just gotten a gradiometer and they were just like, here, figure out how to use this. And so now we have a whole suite of stuff. And so I view it as essential, especially at a place like Spiro, because you walk out there and it's a gigantic site. So how are you going to decide, especially when it's all in grass and hay now, how are you going to decide where to excavate? And so that's sort of a key to us to be able to narrow things down. And in terms of how we test it is we just look for an anomaly that looks, we know what anomalies roughly should look like based upon testing that people have done at other sites. So we know this is probably a house, this is probably a hearth, that sort of thing. And so we just find some that look promising, and then we just plop a pit on top of it, usually in the middle, so you don't miss anything. I learned the hard way years ago that one time I decided I wanted to catch the edge of all the anomalies that I'd found. So we put on 1x1s that were on the edge of each anomaly. And I forgot that the anomalies usually look slightly bigger in the data than they are in real life. And I managed to miss every single feature by 50 centimeters. And we had to expand everything out into a 1x2 instead of a 1x1. So I learned sort of that the hard way. I tell my students that when I'm teaching them geophysics, that everything I'm telling them to do is because I screwed it up once. And so we just sort of go from there. And the idea, eventually what we'd like to do is test enough of these things, we can come up with a classification in the geophysics where, okay, here's type 1, this is probably this type of pit. Here's type 2, this is probably a hearth. But that's quite a ways in the future. And that's honestly, that might be just a good dissertation project for somebody rather than something that I'll ever have time to do.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions,
Here we go.
hang on.
Yeah, they're collections from the Pecola years. Yeah, they're everywhere. There are something like 220 institutions in 150 countries that have collections from the looting. And it's all over the place. Arkansas has quite a bit. They have a lot of those baskets. They have the resting warrior pipe because they had a person at the Arkansas Museum at the time named Sam Dellinger, who went down and was able to negotiate to buy a lot of the stuff either directly from the Pecola folks or buy it off the market. We have some of it, but not a ton. Arkansas has more. And it's to the point where I grew up in Pennsylvania. I have a friend there who sent me an email, 10 or 12 years ago, pointing out that his grandma had a bunch of spiral beads in her attic. So it's somewhere in Pennsylvania. So it's sort of everywhere. And then we have another question about Dr. Bell being involved in spiral. So Dr. Bell is sort of the key figure in the professionalization of archaeology in Oklahoma. Dr. Bell he was from Ohio, and he originally heard about Spiro, and I'm going to get this slightly wrong, but he either was coming to Oklahoma or just anyway, or came out specifically because he heard about it. And he actually went out and took a whole bunch of the photographs that we have of the Pecola folks doing their quote unquote excavations. And then he got involved. He got his fingers in a lot of different stuff from Spiro. We have lots of analysis sheets from Spiro and other sites there's one called Reed up in Delaware County in the northeast corner of the state, where he did a lot of tabulations and stuff and did some publications, but not a lot of super comprehensive ones. But he was definitely a guiding force behind some of the stuff that Don Wyckoff did and Dan Rogers did, and a lot of that sort of stuff. And some of the photographs I have, or a bunch of his photographs, the book may still be available. It's called the Spiro Mound, a photo essay. And it was by some brothers named, or father and son. I can't remember if they're father and son or their brothers now, I'm blanking on it, but Larry and Chris Merriam. And they got hold of a bunch of Dr. Bell's photos and published them in this big, thick volume, which is kind of super important for us. Thank you.
Yes, it was a great presentation. If there are no more questions, I think we'll go ahead and call it a night. But thank you so much, Scott, for speaking with us. This is actually a very unique presentation. I don't think we've had something like this in a while. So Thank you.
Well, if you get a chance, go visit some point, but give it a couple of years because they're waiting to get the museum redone. And also during COVID, the trees went nuts. And so they grew out. If you look at old aerial photographs, the trees have crept out about 10 meters.
Oh,
but
wow.
the Historical Society and the Corps are working really closely on getting it cleaned up. So it's worth checking out, but maybe check in with me first. I'll tell you where we stand. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Thank you, Scott.
Take care.
Okay.